Yo, what's going on, guys? It's your boy. Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about a new movie that's an anthology, so it's going to be a little interesting review today. We're talking about the new Predator movie released on Hulu, Predator: Killer of Killers. Let's talk about it, shall we?
Modern Movie Review.
Okay, so I kind of want to go story through story and kind of dive into each of them and kind of talk about how I'm really impressed, because for people who do not know, the runtime of this movie is about 84 minutes, and I read that and saw, okay, it's going to be 3 separate stories. That feels like it's going to be really condensed. Are we going to have enough time to flesh out these characters? Is it just going to be straight action sequences? What are we going to get with this film? And to my surprise, we do have plenty of time to introduce the characters, introduce the time period that we're in, and actually give us a lot of emotional connections to these characters, and I really love it. The first one is the Viking story. We're following a mother and her son looks to be about maybe like 12 years old, give or take, and he is joining them in this war, and it's supposedly his first war. He seems like he doesn't really want to be fighting. He kind of wants to, be trying to be peaceful if he can. He doesn't like the fact that his family has been seeking revenge this whole time, and I really love it. I think that it is a very interesting kind of story here, where the little kid doesn't really want to fight, and he doesn't want to keep participating in war, and the bloodshed that he's been seeing his entire life is very traumatizing, and he thinks that no one really deserves that. And then we see his mother, who is so fueled by rage and vengeance and wanting to get revenge, that she's basically taking her entire army to go get revenge on the person who killed her father in front of her. And it's a very interesting kind of dynamic between that mother and that son. I really love it. I think that it is played out incredibly well, and I do like the fact that they show that rage has completely consumed her. She is going, and they are wiping out village of Vikings after village of Vikings, just trying to find one individual man who is a leader of one of the other Viking clans, and I really like that. I think that that is very interesting. I think that the action sequences work incredibly well in here. The animation style is absolutely beautiful. All 3 of them have the same animation style. It's like this 2D, kind of like Arcane almost, where it's like it's 2D, but it's almost 3D, but it's very feels hand-drawn, and very each frame individually is like its own work of art. It truly is an incredibly beautiful medium, and they use it to its full advantage here. There's a lot of sequences in this movie that I don't think you could potentially do in a live action, and I don't think it would work well. So the first sequence we get to see, this mother Viking who has been fighting for a really long time, she takes on the first predator that we get to see throughout this movie, and that was another thing that really confused me. I didn't understand that there was going to be different predators fighting each of them. So the first predator we see is the one from the trailers that's absolutely gigantic, and it's like, oh my god, how are they going to take this on? And it starts off with a couple of Vikings fighting against it. It very quickly kind of knocks out a couple of them. The son steps in and kind of saves his mother's life for a little bit, but then he gets blown back, and then she gets blown back, and then the predator ends up going after the mother, and we get this really cool sequence where they end up on a frozen lake, and she ends up under the water, under the ice shield. And because the predators are able to track people using heat sinking technology, she's kind of undetectable for a little bit, and she kind of uses her knowledge of the land and her knowledge of just this general home field advantage, you could say, and she's able to absolutely trick him, get him underwater, and then kind of trick him into drowning himself and wrapping himself up in an anchor. And I believe at the end he ends up exploding himself, if I remember correctly. No, he has what is it called? Like a sonic cannon that blasts things out. And eventually she catches on to the fact that if he does it underwater, he pushes himself back, and she gets him to push himself back into a spike, and he basically decapitates himself. Very interesting fight sequence. I really loved it. I thought that it was very creative, and I think that that's one of the biggest props that I want to give this movie. All of the different fight sequences are incredibly dynamic. They do a lot of creative stuff here, and like I said, this is stuff that only really works in animation. I think that they absolutely nailed it. That entire underwater fight sequence is interesting, and then once her story is over, you see that she ends up getting this little neck collar, and then she ends up on a ship, and she looks over and sees a samurai, and then we go to his story. This is chapter 2, called The Sword. In my opinion, this is the best chapter. It is absolutely beautiful. Once again, the animation is just so good, and it is completely silent. There is no spoken dialogue. These are people who kind of live in a very peaceful way. They take these fighting very seriously. They're very noble, and because of it, it's just dead silent the entire time, and I really like that. I think that it is incredibly powerful, because you're just kind of hearing the people I mean, you're just seeing the people's facial expressions. You're seeing the way that they act and react to specific things. And it is a very beautiful story. So we see this brother who accidentally seriously injured somebody when he was really young and got outcast. And he's kind of been living on his own. And 20 years later, he comes back to that village to fight off against his brother. I believe it's for an honor thing so that he can be welcomed back into the village. He needs to fight against his brother. And like I said, it's completely unspoken. So if I am getting this wrong, that is my apologies. I am sorry. But he goes to duel his brother. They're fighting for a while. And what I love about this is, yeah, the main spectacle here is let's see these people fight against the predators, but we're also seeing that like these people are the best of their own people. Like we're seeing that the Viking is the toughest Viking of all Vikings. They're literally massacring other Viking villages. And then we see that this samurai is able to just go through hordes of security guards to get to his brother, and then he has this duel with his brother that's about 5 minutes long, and he really has the upper hand for the majority of it, and they're using a bunch of different weapons. It's super creative, like I said, very, very innovative, very, very unique, and I love it to death. I think it is so captivating. And then towards the end, he gets to a point where he has his brother pinned up against a fence, and he's going to yield, and then that's when the predator swoops in. He kind of breaks out that fence from behind his brother. He falls, and we assume it's to his death, and it's a very emotional sequence. And then this samurai is fighting against, and this is by far, in my opinion, probably the coolest fight sequence in the entire movie. He's fighting against the predator that is staying invisible the entire time. So he has to use smoke bombs, fireworks, different kind of deflections. He's jumping from rooftop to rooftop, and he can see when the shingles like start shaking a little bit, and he's able to use that to figure out where the guy is. And oh my god, it is so innovative. It is so cool. This fight sequence is absolutely phenomenal. The landscape of it is incredible. I think that the way that they're able to build this kind of, I believe it's Japanese city, absolutely love it. I think that it's beautiful. And this fight sequence goes from the top of like the biggest temple to a river that's outside of the city. And then we discover, once we get to that river, that the brother is still alive. And he wants to continue his duel because he doesn't realize what's going on. And eventually the predator swoops in, and then they work together to fight and kill the predator while the brother ends up bleeding out and dying. And we finally get our first line of dialogue in this one. And he says, "Two leaves that grow on the same tree grow together." And then kind of goes on to say something about brothers. And then he says, "But they fall alone." And then the guy who's our protagonist, who we've been following this whole time, says, "But you're not alone, my brother." And then he sits with him until he dies. And oh my good God, that was maybe like a 20 minutes, maybe like a 20 minutes part of this movie. I was getting ready to sob. It was so good, incredibly emotional, absolutely breathtaking storytelling, and I just absolutely loved it. I thought that that was phenomenal. And then the last story, this one I loved. I like this one because it really mixes it up, because the last two, very serious, very like these people are training to be fighters their entire lives. This one, we get the World War II fighter pilot. Is it World War II fighter pilot? World War I. I think it's World War II fighter pilots. And this guy is somebody who is not necessarily a good pilot, not necessarily somebody who has been in the military and has a bunch of military experience. This is not somebody who is a trained fighter. He's somebody who gets drafted into war. And I think that that was a really cool kind of way to like flip-flop this, because like in the trailers you're saying, oh, okay, well, yeah, they're World War II fighter pilots. They're probably some of the best fighter pilots in the world. No, this is a guy who is a mechanic, so was able to get into the Air Force because he was drafted into the military. They're like, where could this guy be useful? He's not very good at being a mechanic, but he really wanted to be a pilot, and he was passionate about the fact that he could potentially get a plane that's no longer running off the ground, and he was able to do it. And then he gets caught up into this giant like airship battle, which is sick. We get to see some dogfights with I keep wanting to say Terminators instead of Predator, with some Predator level violence and cool weapons and different kind of gadgets and gizmos, and like they are so technologically advanced, the Predator species, compared to these old tiny planes. And it's just incredible the way that this character Torres is able to kind of come up with creative ways to fight against this guy while flying around in this plane. And he does some sequences that would make Tom Cruise proud. I'm not gonna lie, there are some sequences where he's flying this plane and he's kind of doing some like really tight like he goes through a city and he's kind of like going in between the two buildings, and like the way that he does it and threads the needle just like screamed Mission Impossible vibes, and I loved that. That was awesome. That was incredible. And he ends up finding a very creative way to kind of get this guy, the Predator, to crash his ship, and that was beautiful. Once again, incredibly creative, a completely different kind of fight sequence, because the first one we have Vikings, it's very like melee weapons. You got an axe versus, the Predator who's using these sonic cannons. And then you have the second one, which is the samurai who's fighting against an invisible Predator who, for the most part, is also using regular melee weapons, but has a couple of bombs and a couple of tricks up his sleeves like that. And then we have this one where it's a plane versus a giant spaceship that has way more weapons and is way faster, way more technologically advanced, and still the person in this tiny little plane is able to get creative and still is able to win that fight. It's just beautiful. I love it. I think that one of my favorite things about this is just that it shows like some parts of humanity. We might be outnumbered, we might not have an opportunity, but because we're able to use our brains and kind of get creative, that we're able to still win things and we're able to overcome things. And it's like the ultimate underdog story for all three of these, and I love it. I think that it's absolutely phenomenal. And then this all culminated into a gladiator style fight sequence at the end of the movie where the three of them were supposed to kill each other, and that's where the name Killer of Killers comes from. And because the samurai has his moral code, he refuses to kill either of them, because Torres is just a random little guy who got drafted into war. He doesn't want to murder anybody either. And the Viking is trying to kill them because they want to win, but also because they want to die in battle so that they can go to Valhalla and join their son who got murdered in the Viking part of the story. And so overall, the three of them are kind of fighting against each other, but like not really trying super hard. And I just absolutely loved everything that they're able to do with this final act, because it's like a gladiator fight sequence, but they're pretending to fight. And then they actually have they'll throw some random giant monster into the ring, and then they'll fight against that giant monster. And then it becomes this kind of escape plot where they need to steal the spaceship and get out of here. And it's awesome. I absolutely loved everything about this third act. Considering I wasn't expecting the three stories to really come together like this at all, I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was absolutely phenomenal, and I really loved that. And then I don't know a lot about the Predator franchise, but I will say it appears that this is potentially going to be canon, and it's going to be setting up other things that might potentially be happening in the future. I'm not entirely sure, but at the end of the movie, one of the characters dies. I'm not going to say who, but they end up going into this coffin and ends up in this giant vault that has the dead bodies of everybody who has murdered the Predators in the past, so that they can kind of study their body for research purposes or something like that. And we get to see the person from Prey is also in one of these little coffin things. And I was like, I'm pretty confident this is the person from Prey. And then after the show finally wrapped and the credits went through, this popped up on my screen and was able to confirm, yeah, she's in one of those little coffins at the end of the movie. So that's intriguing. There's potentially going to be a more interconnected universe with this. This franchise is going to be more fleshed out. I think that that's awesome. And considering that's being fleshed out right now and Aliens being fleshed out right now, there's totally an opportunity that will have one of the most interesting clashes in maybe 4 or 5 years from now. Alien versus Predator, I would be down for it. I think that it would be insanely sick. And considering we're still getting a bunch of Godzilla versus Kong, I don't think it'd be redundant to do that. I think that it would actually be really awesome to do it. So overall, I had a really good time with this movie. I thought that it was fantastic. The animation style is beautiful. The score is fantastic. The way that they're able to give us these emotional ties to each of these characters, because the Viking has their son, who is somebody who's very peaceful and kind of teaches them. In that final battle, they have a couple of flashbacks to their son, and they can kind of see their son in the Torres character that we meet later in the movie. And it's very emotional, and I love that. And then we have the samurai with his brother, and I love the way that we're able to get that kind of brotherhood friendship there. And then we have Torres with his father that he really wants to make proud. I love it. I think that they did an incredible job of characterizing these characters in such a limited amount of time and still giving us plenty of action sequences to absolutely love and adore. This movie was fantastic. But yeah, that being said, that was it for this video, guys. If I had to give this movie a rating on a scale of 1 to 100, as I typically do, I'm going to give this one a solid 86 out of 100. I think that this is one of my favorite movies that just came out this year. I think without a doubt, it might potentially end up being like the best animated movie that's came out this year, because it doesn't look like it's going to have a shit ton of competition. I'm not huge on Zootopia or The Bad Guys 2 or Elio. I love Pixar, but I am very concerned about Elio. So we'll see as more movies kind of come out, but I do think there's a good chance that by the end of the year, this might be my favorite animated movie that came out this year. But yeah, that being said, that's it for this video, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and checking it out. I love and appreciate you guys so much for watching. And if you liked it, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll hopefully see you guys in the next one. Peace out. Bow, bow, bow.